Get away from her, you bastard! Aliens wasn't just a sci-fi sequel. It was a brutal war film disguised as outer space horror. What audiences didn't see were the clashing egos, collapsing sets, and dangerous stunts that nearly derailed James Cameron's masterpiece. Cameras rolled while tempers erupted, props malfunctioned, and the cast endured real fear inside suffocating spaceships. Today, we're pulling back the steel doors of Hadley's Hope to reveal 20 weird facts about Aliens, 1986, you didn't know. From casting rebellions to weapons shortages, from on-set meltdowns to real-life injuries, it's all here. And wait until you hear the bonus fact, a revelation so shocking it flips the legacy of this movie on its head. Lock and load. Let's dive in. Sigourney Weaver almost didn't return. It's impossible to imagine Aliens without Sigourney Weaver, yet she nearly walked away. Fox originally balked at paying her $1 million salary, considering the first Alien an ensemble success rather than her star vehicle. James Cameron threatened to scrap the sequel entirely if Weaver wasn't signed. Negotiations dragged so long that Cameron began pre-production without her, preparing contingency rewrites. Eventually, Weaver not only secured her paycheck but earned an Academy Award nomination, the rare honor for a sci-fi role. It wasn't just business. It was a battle of principle. Weaver knew Ripley was cinema's first true female action hero. Without her, Aliens would have collapsed into another anonymous monster flick. This fight set the tone for Ripley's on-screen defiance, blurring the line between Weaver's contract struggles and her character's resilience. The crew rebelled against James Cameron. On location in England, Cameron inherited a veteran Pinewood Studios crew loyal to Ridley Scott. They dismissed him as a young Canadian upstart. Morale collapsed when Cameron banned tea breaks during shooting, sacrilege to the British team. Tensions boiled over when crew members openly mocked Cameron's instructions and even faked incompetence. At one point, cinematographer Dick Bush walked off, forcing Cameron to replace him mid-shoot with Adrian Biddle. The rebellion wasn't just behind the camera. It echoed on screen. The claustrophobic tension among Marines and Ripley mirrored the director's real struggle to command respect. In the end, Cameron's iron grip forced the film into shape, but the hostility lingered. For many crew members, Aliens wasn't a movie set. It was a battlefield, and Cameron, like Ripley, had to prove survival meant dominance. The pulse rifles were real guns. The terrifying sound of the Marines' M41A pulse rifles didn't come from futuristic props. Cameron wanted authenticity, so the production built them on actual military hardware. The rifles were modified Thompson submachine guns grafted with Remington 870 shotguns beneath the barrel. Every burst on set was live blank fire, echoing through. Pinewood's sound stages like real combat. The recoil stunned actors, many of whom had never handled weapons before. Carrie Henn, who played Newt, had to wear ear protection constantly to shield her from the deafening gunfire. It wasn't science fiction, it was live ammunition in controlled chaos. This decision gave Aliens its visceral punch, but also created danger. Crew members flinched during takes, fearing stray shells. The arsenal wasn't Hollywood smoke and mirrors, it was war by proxy, captured on celluloid. Bill Paxton improvised his famous lines. "Game over, man, game over," wasn't scripted. It was pure Bill Paxton. His portrayal of Private Hudson evolved into the voice of terrified humanity amidst chaos. Cameron gave Paxton freedom to riff during takes, and his southern drawl delivered comic relief that balanced the unrelenting dread. What audiences didn't know is that Hudson's panic mirrored Paxton's real anxiety. Filming in cramped, smoke-filled sets triggered his claustrophobia, and improvisation became his coping mechanism. Other gems like "Maybe you haven't been keeping up on current events" emerged the same way. It wasn't just funny banter. It was Paxton grounding the story in authentic human meltdown. By letting an actor's real fear bleed into the script, Aliens found its heartbeat, gallows humor in the face of doom. Lance Henriksen prepared to cut himself on camera. Lance Henriksen's chilling android Bishop nearly terrified the crew off set. To sell Bishop's inhuman edge, Henriksen arrived at auditions with self-applied contact lenses and suggested he might slice his own arm during the knife trick scene. Cameron was horrified, but impressed. Though the final version used careful camera trickery with real knives, Henriksen pushed his method intensity to unsettling levels. Off-camera, he even wore specially designed dentures to give Bishop an uncanny smile. Henriksen wanted audiences to feel he wasn't quite human, even in silence. The disturbing result worked so well that co-stars admitted genuine unease filming alongside him. Not horror effects, not editing tricks. Henriksen himself blurred the line between performer and predator, forcing everyone to question, was Bishop ally or threat? 6. James Remar was fired mid-shoot. The role of Corporal Hicks almost belonged to James Remar, not Michael Biehn. Remar had already filmed several scenes before being abruptly dismissed. The official story cited creative differences, but Remar later admitted he was struggling with personal issues, including substance abuse, during production. Cameron couldn't risk his lead Marine unraveling, so he recast the role overnight. Michael Biehn, who had worked with Cameron on The Terminator, was rushed to London and slipped into Hicks's armor. By then, the sets were already lit and cameras ready, so Biehn had to blend in seamlessly without rehearsal. It wasn't a casting adjustment. It was an emergency. Transplant. The switch changed the film's chemistry. Bihn's calm, restrained presence contrasted Hudson's panic and Ripley's ferocity, cementing him as the emotional anchor of the squad. Carrie Henn had never acted before. Newt, the lone child survivor, remains one of sci-fi's most haunting characters. Yet Carrie Henn, who played her, had never acted professionally. She was discovered at her school in England, chosen for her natural presence rather than polished performance. On set, she treated filming like playtime, wandering through smoke and debris with childlike curiosity. Cameron deliberately shielded her from the scariest imagery, ensuring her screams in the ventilation shafts were authentic reactions rather than rehearsed terror. She didn't return to acting after Aliens, instead becoming a school teacher. Not an industry prodigy, not a Hollywood darling, just a child whose raw innocence made the film unforgettable. Decades later, her naturalism stands as proof that sometimes the most powerful performances come not from training, but from untouched authenticity. The facehugger scene used condoms. One of the most disturbing effects came from unexpected household items. When the trapped facehugger attacks Newt and Ripley in the medical lab, the creature's slimy movements needed a practical texture. The effects team resorted to using condoms stretched over animatronic mechanisms, coating them with KY jelly to create the grotesque organic sheen. It wasn't advanced CGI. It was latex and lubricant manipulated by wires and puppeteers crawling just out of frame. This bizarre improvisation gave the scene its revolting authenticity, making audiences squirm. For the actors, it wasn't much easier. Sigourney Weaver admitted the tactile realism made her skin crawl, even knowing the creature was rubber and tubing. Not special effects wizardry, not digital illusion. It was human ingenuity, making monsters out of everyday objects in a nightmare you could almost touch. The Alien Queen required 16 puppeteers. The Alien Queen wasn't a man in a suit. She was a colossal 14-foot animatronic puppet requiring a small army to bring to life. Designed by Stan Winston, the Queen demanded 16 operators, each controlling limbs, head, jaw, and tail through hydraulics and rods. Her movements had to be perfectly synchronized, like a nightmarish ballet. The scale was so massive that the set had to be reinforced, and Sigourney Weaver described the first reveal as genuinely terrifying. Her fight-or-flight instinct kicked in before cameras even rolled. It wasn't Hollywood magic. It was a mechanical beast, heavy, awkward, and nearly uncontrollable. Every scene with her was a war between art and gravity, between precision and chaos. And somehow, the team pulled it off, creating one of cinema's most unforgettable monsters. The power loader was real and dangerous. Ripley's showdown in the power loader wasn't a trick of editing. The massive exosuit was a real, functioning machine. Operators strapped inside had to balance the entire contraption while hidden stuntmen controlled certain movements off camera. The machine was so heavy that every step risked toppling crushing crew or damaging set walls. Sigourney Weaver rehearsed extensively, but the sheer scale left her vulnerable. If the loader failed, she could have been seriously injured. Watching the final Queen battle, audiences assumed it was cinematic spectacle. What they didn't know, it was actual risk, with Weaver's safety hanging by a thread. The loader wasn't science fiction fantasy, it was industrial engineering, equal parts marvel and menace, and the tension it brought was real. The dropship nearly destroyed the set. The iconic UD-4L Cheyenne dropship wasn't just a model on a stick. It was a massive, detailed miniature rigged for explosive sequences. But when effects crews tested the rocket thrusters with real pyrotechnics, the force nearly burned down the stage. Flames shot higher than expected, blackening the backdrop and forcing evacuations. Cameron, known for demanding realism, refused to settle for simple sparks. He wanted firepower audiences could feel. What resulted was a terrifyingly authentic sequence where every blast threatened to tear the miniature apart. It wasn't Hollywood illusion. It was a live fire exercise in a soundstage barely equipped for the chaos. What audiences saw as a thrilling descent into Hadley's Hope was, for the crew, a brush with disaster. proof that even miniatures in Cameron's world carried very real, very big risks. The chestburster gag returned to haunt actors. While Aliens expanded the franchise's scale, Cameron couldn't resist a callback to the original film's most infamous gag, the chestburster. For the scene with cocooned colonists, actors were strapped in sticky resin for hours, immobile and sweating under lights. When the parasite burst from one performer's chest, the effect triggered genuine revulsion. Even seasoned cast members like Michael Biehn admitted the sight got under his skin. The actor trapped in slime described the experience as suffocating, with panic rising as crew reapplied goo for multiple takes. Not simple makeup, not casual discomfort. It was endurance bordering on torment. Cameron wanted authenticity, and he got it. Actors screaming not because of the script, but because being trapped, helpless, and preyed upon felt terrifyingly real. It blurred the boundary between acting and genuine survival instinct. The flamethrowers almost broke safety laws. The fiery destruction of the alien nest wasn't achieved with safe little flame bars. The production used actual military-grade flamethrowers, illegal for civilian use without special clearance. Cameron insisted the intensity of real fire was non-negotiable. To secure permits, Fox's production office had to liaise with government authorities, carefully documenting each weapon's storage and usage. On set, actors wielded the flamethrowers with tanks strapped to their backs, aware that one mistake could ignite disaster. Crew members recalled standing behind fireproof shields during takes, praying nothing misfired. Sigourney Weaver herself admitted she felt a little too close to the flames. Not stage pyrotechnics, not Hollywood trickery. This was a scene so dangerous that modern productions would never allow it. And yet, that danger bleeds through every frame, giving the inferno unforgettable intensity. The Sulaco interiors were recycled. Fans remember the claustrophobic corridors of the Sulaco, but what they didn't know is that many of those sets weren't built from scratch. The production salvaged materials from abandoned aircraft hangars and industrial factories around London. Old metal walkways, control panels, and even discarded airplane parts were welded together to create the ship's brutalist military look. Cameron believed the set should feel lived in, not polished, so grime was deliberately added to every surface. At times, the corridors smelled of machine oil and rust. Actors described the environment as oppressive, saying it was easy to believe they were inside a steel coffin drifting through space. Not slick design, not glossy sci-fi futurism. It was repurposed junk turned into cinematic legend, proof that atmosphere isn't bought, it's built from creative scavenging. Paul Reiser's role nearly went to someone else. Paul Reiser's performance as Burke, the smarmy corporate liaison, became unforgettable precisely because he wasn't a traditional villain. But he wasn't the studio's first choice. Executives pushed for a more established, heavy, fearing audiences wouldn't buy Reiser's softer persona as dangerous. Cameron resisted, arguing that betrayal would be more shocking if it came from someone who seemed trustworthy, even likable. Reiser leaned into this, improvising nervous humor that masked his character's cold greed. On set, Sigourney Weaver admitted she sometimes forgot he was the bad guy until the camera rolled. It wasn't casting by type, it was casting against type, and it worked. Burke became one of cinema's most despised company men, not because he looked evil, but because he hid it so well. 16. James Horner's score was a last-minute miracle. The pounding, nerve-shredding score of Aliens is iconic today, but James Horner barely survived writing it. With production running over schedule, Cameron handed him incomplete scenes just weeks before release. Horner was forced to compose entire sequences in marathon overnight sessions, often working without sleep. One cue, the combat drop, was written in under 24 hours. To make matters worse, Cameron repeatedly demanded rewrites, leaving Horner furious. The two didn't speak for years after the film, and yet, despite the chaos, Horner delivered a soundtrack that earned an Oscar nomination and became one of the most imitated action scores of the decade. It wasn't a polished process. It was a frantic, desperate scramble that somehow produced brilliance. The music doesn't just accompany the action. It pulses with the same tension that nearly tore production apart. The British press mocked the production. While filming at Pinewood Studios, Cameron faced constant media sniping from the British press. Journalists doubted his credentials, referring to him dismissively as the truck driver turned director. Reports of crew strikes and on-set arguments leaked, with tabloids predicting the movie would collapse into chaos. Cameron, already under pressure from Fox, treated the press like another alien threat, an external force trying to sabotage his mission. He banned reporters from the set, fueling more gossip about the disaster film. But when Aliens premiered, The same papers that mocked Cameron hailed the film as a triumph, not a failed sequel, not a vanity project, a cinematic shockwave that silenced doubters. The hostility only reinforced Cameron's iron-willed reputation. He thrived under siege, just like Ripley. And history proved him right. Michael Biehn hated his costume. While Hicks became a fan favorite, Michael Biehn despised one element: his armor. The production had already customized gear with James Remar's graffiti before Biehn joined, so rather than rework it, Cameron told him to wear it as is. Biehn was frustrated that his personal touches weren't included, unlike his co-stars who had time to decorate their armor with unique slogans. To him, it made Hicks feel less personal, less lived in. He later admitted he always felt a little like the outsider because of it. A strange irony, since Hicks ultimately became the steadying presence in the group. What fans saw as understated professionalism was partly Biehn's frustration channeling into stoicism. Not polished heroics, not vanity, just an actor finding strength inside a uniform he secretly hated. The final battle took weeks to film. Ripley versus the Alien Queen remains one of cinema's greatest showdowns, but what looks like a frantic few minutes took nearly 3 weeks to shoot. Every moment of the power loader fight had to be broken into tiny segments, choreographed between Weaver, puppeteers, and stunt teams. Smoke machines overheated, hydraulic rigs jammed, and the Queen's massive headpiece frequently sagged mid-take. Weaver endured hours inside a sweaty harness, balancing the loader's weight while maintaining Ripley's ferocity. Crew members described the sequence as war in slow motion, every frame a small victory against mechanical failure. The result, however, was worth it. What audiences experienced as seamless intensity was actually an endurance test stitched together shot by shot. Not just movie magic, not just spectacle, a hard-fought battle both on screen and behind it. The film changed the U.S. Marine Corps. Here's a wild truth. Aliens didn't just influence Hollywood, it reshaped the U.S. military. The film's depiction of colonial Marines with their pulse rifles, helmet cams, and squad-based tactics directly inspired Marine Corps training manuals in the late 80s and 90s. Military analysts praised the authenticity of squad banter, command structures, and even motion tracker concepts. Some recruits admitted they signed up after watching Hicks and Vasquez fight aliens. It wasn't fantasy. It was a cinematic vision so convincing that soldiers adopted it as doctrine. This strange crossover blurred the line between science fiction and real-world warfare. A movie meant to entertain became an accidental training video. Cameron hadn't just crafted a sequel, he'd shaped the future of combat culture itself. Bonus fact: Sigourney Weaver's mother inspired Ripley. The deepest secret isn't about sets or stunts, it's about Ripley herself. Sigourney Weaver revealed years later that her portrayal was influenced by her mother, Elizabeth Inglis, a British actress who left Hollywood to raise a family. Weaver saw in her mother both strength and sacrifice, the protective instinct Ripley channels for Newt. The fierce tenderness audiences connected with wasn't drawn from the script. It was personal. Weaver built Ripley as a tribute to real women's resilience, using her mother as the silent blueprint. Not just a character, not just a sci-fi warrior. Ripley was, at her core, a reflection of lived truth. And that truth transformed Aliens from a creature feature into one of the most human action films ever made. Aliens wasn't just a sequel. It was chaos forged into legend. Every battle behind the camera, crew rebellions, dangerous weapons, last-minute music bled into the intensity on screen. What we watch today isn't polished perfection. It's survival captured on film. That's why it endures. If you enjoyed uncovering these hidden truths, smash that like button, subscribe for more, and remember, when it comes to aliens, the scariest monsters weren't always on screen. They were waiting behind the camera.